So I am very pleased today to be joined by my good friend and often colleague Sergio. As Kelly mentioned, we'll be walking through an introduction of the diamond. We'll discuss some practical use cases, both beginning and advanced. So if this is the first time you've ever heard of the diamond model, an introduction, hopefully you'll be able to leave today with some practical things that you can start doing in your day-to-day analysis. And then third, we'll walk through a real use case using Dragos's worldview intelligence as it's integrated into our ThreatConnect platform. So right off, what is the diamond model? So, and often this is actually confused as we talk with folks. It is an analytic methodology for intrusion analysis. It's meant to guide analysts as they're investigating an intrusion or even pre or post intrusion to better understand the capabilities and infrastructure and how a given adversary or just a group of activity is clumped together, clustered together against a victim or a group of victims. As you can see, it's named a diamond because of the structure here. There are 4 nodes on a graph: capabilities, infrastructure, victim, and then finally adversary. And we'll talk a bit more about each of these as they help analysts discover, develop, track, group, and hopefully counter or place themselves to counter given adversaries. It's used day to day by threat intelligence analysts, more and more by incident responders and risk mitigation planners. So a little bit of background: how did we come up with the diamond? Going way back to 2006 in a building with not very many windows, Sergio, Chris, and I needed a way to characterize, organize threats that we were seeing affect lots and lots and increasing numbers commercial entities, track those threats as they evolve, and then sort them out from one another to better understand what their capabilities and intent were, and ultimately figure out ways that we could prevent activity from them or counter them once they were in. And I'll also state, given here, I can't resist that, Chris and Sergio are really the real heroes here, hence the Captain America and Iron Man. No one really knows where Captain America is right now, or where Chris went. I think he's either in Apple or he's somewhere in Wakanda.
Yeah.
We haven't heard from him in a while.
Exactly. I think he's missing in action right now, probably busy fighting many adversaries.
That's right. Okay, so current usage, cognitive model. This means that ad hoc, as you're doing analysis, you can leverage the diamond model, and that's something that's we train or other groups train, have been taught within the government and military for probably the better part or even over a decade now, but also within commercial space. So thousands of folks have been exposed to and used the diamond model. It has been used as a foundational concept for emerging cyber ontologies and standards such as STIX and even attack as well. And then, formally, it is a set and graph based theory, or theory. Set and graph theory based model that we've used within our ThreatConnect platform, and I'm sure others have used this too. Okay, so let's take a walk through the diamond itself. So starting at the top here with the adversary, this hopefully as we go through these will be somewhat common sense or easy to understand. Adversaries are typically a bad guy persona or maybe a group of bad guys or that seek to do harm or otherwise intrude on victim networks. They can be characterized by their actual persona, who they are, but also features such as their email addresses, handles, phone numbers, things that are pivotable and that you can understand or link different disparate activity to based on the footprints that they leave about their own persona. Next, the capabilities. So these are you know, very broad spectrum malware, the exploits that enable that malware, hacker tools that they might use once they've penetrated a network, or other things such as stolen certs. Over on the infrastructure side, this is typically the internet-based infrastructure leverage to deliver capabilities or carry out attacks. And so these consist of, but not limited to, IP addresses, domain names, email addresses, etc. And then finally, the victim. And this can be characterized similar to the adversary by their personas themselves, the network assets that are targeted, or email addresses that are targeted. And as we work through these, we expect that you know, on any given event that carries out some capability over some infrastructure delivered to a victim, there will be unknowns. Part of the purpose of the methodology being developed is so that you can help uncover those unknowns, or even predict areas where you don't have full knowledge of an attack. There are also meta features within the diamond that help characterize a given event as it's carried out by an adversary or some adversary. These include timestamps, the phase of a given intrusion. This is pretty easily translated into the kill chain. The result, whether this was a success or failure, allows for, you know, if you actually stopped or the adversary failed in some portion of an intrusion, you can track that as well. That's great for measuring COA effectiveness. The direction of given activity, this can be, and these are abbreviated here, but I to V, infrastructure to victim, I to I, infrastructure to infrastructure, adversary to infrastructure. This is also helpful for keeping track of pivots that you're making across diamond capabilities or infrastructure. The class of activity, you know, is this a phishing attack? Is this a watering hole attack, etc.? And then probably more obscure is the resources needed to be able to carry out the activity. This may be, you know, in the case of, looks like this is a custom developed exploit that may have taken months. You can begin to infer some resources that were needed in the background prior to the attack in order to develop the capability itself, or to host the infrastructure over time. Okay. Next, kind of moving into a slightly more advanced but also very practical use of the diamond, and this complements the kill chain pretty almost one for one, where activity threads can describe a given incident. And a vertical means this is linking events, diamond events, to each other in a causal relationship that are time-based. So one event must occur before the next occurs, and that can move down through the phases of the kill chain. Then we can use horizontal linking to link similar incidents to each other. So in this case, you know, the C2 that was in incident 1 was the same C2 that was used in incident 2, or the delivery mechanism was, and the delivery mechanism was also the same or similar. So those linkages can occur and can be weighted by confidence, especially, you know, across horizontal or vertical links. This creates the foundation of some other uses of the diamond that you'll see here in creating activity groups next. It's also really useful to note here that MITRE's attack really adds a whole new capability because they have created a codified means of characterizing TTPs, or tactics, techniques, and procedures. It presents another way or another element to link incidents together, as well as another pivot point for doing investigations. These activity threads aren't limited to you know, just one incident. You can look at these in the context of campaigns or grouping malware families or victim clusters. Serge, do you have anything here, or you want me to keep on going?
Yeah, I think the the thing is that we're trying to get to from the diamond model perspective is always for everybody, to keep in their mind that it's always about helping the analyst find that next step, the next unknown. Being an analyst is a lot like, Hansel and Gretel in the woods, right? You follow a breadcrumb trail, hoping that the crumbs don't end at some point. But when they do, what now? Do we keep going straight? Do we turn left? That house with candy on it looks really inviting. What do we do here? And the diamond model is really to help analysts kind of build this model and picture in their mind of how an adversary is operating, not only against them, but against, the world of other victims. And so these threads are fundamentally the linkages, these, this nodal linkage in your mind of how things belong together, right? What belongs together? Because then you can get to the question of, okay, well, if these things belong together, what comes before or what comes after? And you could start asking and interrogating, your data set a lot better. So it's fundamentally, these threads are about getting to the fundamental relationships of it all, and then kind of figuring out, well, what is the next best question I can ask? Because you can hit a black hole or a hard a rock pretty quickly in analysis.
Cool. I'm previewing the questions here. I think we'll hold them towards the end, but there's some good ones coming in. So activity groups. So to me, this is, once you move beyond the basic pivoting functionality of the diamond, activity groups really become one of the core tenets of defining what a given set of activity is in terms of specific feature selection. And when we talk about feature selection, these are looking at specific capabilities or specific infrastructure or specific TTPs or attack patterns used either within a given time frame or as they're evolved over time. Defining activity groups, I think, is, there's been lots of debate over within threat intelligence communities, and sometimes it's a little bit of navel gazing, but oh, is this APT 28 or is this APT 29? I think that activity groups, and in particular grouping functions, give a scientific means for determining that based on defined features with confidence weights on whether or not this belongs in group A, or this activity belongs in group A, or this activity belongs in group B. I will say also, while the diamond is commonly used for determining attribution or helping to sort out attribution, it's not limited to that. You can use the same methodology to sort out whether this is, a given capability is really the same capability. Is this part of a known malware family? You're just using different features in that selection process. So formally, the way that you go about this is really parallels the scientific method. You define your question, or you define your hypothesis, which can be codified into the grouping function. And then you test across a given data set that you have access to what meets that criteria, and then you look at the results. If you need to refine that, if you counter your own hypothesis, you might need to change your grouping function, or if it's good, then you stick with it. But it almost certainly will need to evolve over time as the activity evolves over time. Serge, do you have anything to add to this one?
Okay. Yeah, Andy, I think, there's, I think that we get down to, as you were kind of alluding to in information security, we get down to like almost religious battles over activity. And I think, I've been involved now in this and classifying, activity events and intrusions for a long time, and I've been involved in my fair share of, fighting battles over what gets named what, and so forth. I even mentioned in the paper how powerful naming is to things, and that really where the grouping idea came from is fundamentally the idea that we're going to group stuff together, and it does logically work that way, but that most of our grouping arguments are really if any of you know the Vienna Circle of philosophers, and it came, the idea that all philosophical arguments came down to different definitions in language. It kind of comes down to that, right? If you see a whole bunch of InfoSec people arguing about when something belongs to one group or something belongs to another group, really we're just arguing about definitions. Because I may have a completely different definition of what I would call the group that others call APT28, and I may group very differently for my own purposes. And guess what? That's completely legit. That doesn't make me wrong. The powerful thing about grouping functions is that you can group for whatever business reason or mission requirement you have. There are times when I group intrusion activity not by supposed adversary, but by vulnerability usage, because I want to do things like attack graphs and stuff. And so I want to find out how adversaries or what groups of activities seem to be following certain paths down attack graphs. And doing that, you don't group by like APT28 or whatever. You group by several other different types of features. And we also group malware together in terms of functionality to do. When I was at Microsoft, we would group malware together, not in terms of who was responsible for that malware, but more for what functions that malware was using, and how that malware was operating, because then we would counter that malware by using, we would counter then whole families or classes of malware. And so I think that it's interesting that, we get to these battles in here, and grouping is really personal. And I think we have to be very careful about, being too aggressive with others in our own community about it, and that we all want to group on different things, and that's okay. We can group on how versus group on who, or group on why. And so the grouping function fundamentally that we're all doing is very different and personal, and the features we're selecting and the function that we're using is all different. So I think it's very important to realize that.
Agreed. And we have a question in that I think is appropriate to take now. So Sergio, and I hate to put you on the spot, but how would you classify or create a grouping function for this fuzzy snuggly duck thing?
Yeah, so I would probably group Fuzzy Snuggly Duck by a whole bunch of trolls on Twitter who like having fun. So yeah, probably a whole bunch of miscreants out there who have no idea what they're doing.
That sounds accurate to me. Okay. That was actually much funnier in my head before I said it, but maybe I pulled it off. Okay, so the extended diamond. This is really looking at kind of taking really an activity group by itself, if it is loosely or even strictly defined as an intrusion set, and looking at the axes within the diamond. So the relationship between the adversary and the victim, and the capabilities and infrastructure. So the socio-political axis or meta feature here, really this line here, is very useful for looking at or doing analysis around intent. So if you can understand why an adversary is going after a victim, you might be able to predict what other victims that adversary may go after. Likewise, you might be able to predict what other adversaries might target a given victim. You can also do some advanced moves, such as if you are doing threat hunting in the threat intelligence context of threat hunting, and looking outside your network for adversaries that might be targeting, say, state state elections or adversaries that might have an interest in gaining information from about the upcoming Olympics. You can actually begin to hunt out in either publicly available space or private data sets, things like VirusTotal, to look for activity that might be motivated by a given intent. Similarly, if you look across this axis, the technology meta feature, you can hunt activity that has nothing to do with a given adversary or victim necessarily, but might exploit a given vulnerability, or might be looking for specific types of infrastructure to launch attacks from. And then you might discover from that compromised infrastructure, or discovering attempts for compromising a given or exploiting a given vulnerability, you might discover new victims, or you might discover new adversaries. Any thoughts on that, Serge, before I move on?
Yeah, I think that Andy, what you said there is really powerful. One of the things I learned early in my career as a hunter was that these extended elements of the diamond model are really powerful, because you get to almost predictive level intel, right? You can see maybe where things are going. There's always a relationship between an adversary and victim, and that relationship might be, spurious, or it might be very direct, but there's always going to be some relationship, and so that's very helpful to exploit. If you're talking more about the social and economic aspects of intrusion activity. The technological features are really powerful because, when you start thinking in terms of what data can I use passive DNS? Can I use, domain registration data? That all falls on that technology meta feature, right? Which is, it's the enabling functions of intrusions. It's not the intrusion itself. And so when you're looking for things like, well, how would I identify new domains that are created prior to an operation actually taking place? What you're really doing is exploiting that technological meta feature by using an understanding of how adversaries are creating domains, and then applying those, those behaviors or analytics to domain data. What you're really doing is pulling that out, right? I mean, you're really asking a diamond question of how are adversaries leveraging domain name creation, and how are they doing it, and what features are out there, right? Is it they're using a specific, email address, or a type of domain, a certain, regular expression or pattern that they're following. And so you can really get to I would say, early intel that's, beyond, as we like to say, left of boom, right? And so I would say that these are the features that really get you beyond that next step of intel, if you can get good at asking these questions.
Cool. All right, so next, the diamond's been around for a while, but by no means do we attempt to treat it as the be-all, end-all. It actually, it gains power and even relies on other models that have been developed or are being developed. And I'm pretty excited about what the future of attack is overall, but in particular in how it can work with the diamond, and also is probably a bit more established with how the diamond and the kill chain can work together. So probably one of the more advanced moves that you can do with the diamond is building up inputs into threat modeling. And this can be done simply by leveraging the breadth of knowledge on particular activity groups, and overlaying those with your own defensive technology stack and procedures, so your people process technology, and overlaying the adversaries effectively, whether you know them, who the people are, but their processes and technology, to see where your gaps are on an attack activity graph. I think that's much better informed when you take that adversary data that the diamond can provide and then lay it over attack as a codified means for mapping adversary techniques to your controls to create a defensive gap analysis. Similarly, with the cyber kill chain, you can take that same data and look at what your courses of actions are vis-a-vis your controls as well. But there are other benefits as well that are probably just more easily leveraged day to day. So as we mentioned before, attack provides codified techniques that you can use in your day-to-day analysis as you're doing pivoting or creating features for selection in an activity group. And then similarly, I think the diamond complements attack by extending the things that you can pivot off of beyond just, or the things that you can characterize about an adversary beyond just the techniques, which that includes the IOCs and possibly attribution that can help you build out your holistic understanding of an adversary and what you might do to prevent or respond to attacks from it. And then, of course, as we showed earlier, and you can kind of see throughout the slide deck here, we put the kill chain and the diamond together regularly in activity threads just to categorize them in an understandable means.
I think, Andy, there's two questions on the board here that this is a perfect time to answer. And one is, how can you use the diamond model to inform threat and risk assessment? And what we show here using these models together is exactly how you do that, where you map out. So the diamond model works with an intel, right? So its idea is to do an intel-based risk assessment. So it's not a like blue sky, blue team kind of approach where you're like, okay, well, let's just let's create a hypothetical adversary with hypothetical things and see what we can do. This is the diamond model is really a ground-based, intel-based approach, which is here's what is actually happening in the world and what we need to know about it. And then what you do is you map that together with attack. And that was another question that's asked, is how do you use attack and the diamond together? Well, in the diamond meta feature methodology is exactly where attack fits, right? So it's the taxonomy you use to describe how each diamond event is operating. It's the methodology there. And so those together create the kill chain security kind of approach. In the diamond model, we create these activity attack graphs, and you can do a couple of things right here. You can take what's called a coverage analysis, and you can ask the question, how much of this can we do or see? Can we detect everything in this, in this graph or in this table of things? And so that's called a coverage analysis, right? How much can we cover of the table? Could we see or do everything? And then the next one is what we call a severability analysis. And that's the attack graph that we have there on the bottom left. And that's where you can draw attacks out as a graph. Now, we borrowed this very heavily from others. So I don't claim that this is the first. What we did is just basically map the diamond, how you can map intrusion events and intelligence to an attack graph effectively. But effectively, you just take a severability approach and you say, well, how many points of this graph? So if an adversary needs to go from beginning to end to be successful, how many points in that graph can I sever with my operations? And the more you can sever, the better, right? Meaning the less likely that the adversary is going to be successful. And so that would be how you would take a risk. That's how you would make a risk assessments and work attack into it, and then make not offensive, but more defensive operational decision making in terms of what should we do, and also in terms of what purchases you should make, right? Well, we can't do this or we can't see this, but we need to. And so maybe we should go buy something to do this for us, or build it to do this for us. And then that's how all of this fits, right? So your Intel team, your SOC should be using these models to come together to say, okay, what's actually going on in the world and what do we need to do about it?
Very good. So at this point, we're going to transition a bit to talk about a specific use case using Dragos's worldview intelligence story report from it. So Sergio, I'll give you the ball.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to track, this is using real Intel, by the way, and you can get this now through ThreatConnect. And so Dragos produces industrial control intelligence, right? So our view of the world is what adversaries and threats in the world are touching things that go boom. And that for us is very important, right? We're the only company in the world who's completely dedicated to that threat problem. So we follow this. This is kind of set up. This is with real world intel set up like a incident response. So this is like one of hundreds in my career I've gone through, right? So in this instance, what we're going to do is we're going to track a file that we showed up in our network, and we may have found it in any way, right? Carbon Black could have found it, or any sort of EDR tool could have found this tool, and all of a sudden this thing shows up. And the SOC, should theoretically have a good decision-making process where it's, well, what are we going to do with this now, right? Is this going to be a wipe and replace, clean and remediate kind of approach, or or does this go over to like maybe we're mature enough and we have an Intel team, and the Intel team needs to ask the question, well, is there something more here than what meets the eye? And so, we in Dragos, we track activity, and we publish and describe activity as an activity group, and that's what we just described earlier today. We use that term in general, and at Dragos we don't group activity by attribution. So unlike many others like APT28 or so forth, we don't track and group by attribution. And the reason for that is because incident response and intrusion analysis in industrial controls is very different. Not fundamentally different, but it is very different than it is in the traditional IT space. And one of the things that makes it different is that we have a very high level maturity of adversary that we generally operate against, and those that are operating against us. And so we also get a lot of very interesting things that you see in the IT world, but honestly, most Intel groups in the world are not sophisticated enough to understand, is that there are a lot of times when 2 groups or 3 groups or even more will work together for a common cause. We call that, if 2 countries are working together, we call that foreign technical assistance. And the thing that really screws a lot of people up is that if you're going by attribution, but you've got multiple countries working against you, you're not going to group very well. If you're grouping for attribution, and one group does part of an operation and another group then takes over and does another part of an operation, your grouping just got all screwed up, because you've just messed up your grouping function because you're not grouping accurately. And the reason you're doing that is because you're effectively guessing at attribution rather than actually having data. You're not actually mapping data, you're mapping at hypotheses. And so we can, I would say my favorite one to poke at is, as much as I love John and a good friend over at FireEye, I give John a lot of shit about sandworm, right? When everything's sandworm, nothing is sandworm anymore. And that's the thing, right? Where sandworm, there's lots of things going on with sandworm, and honestly, probably not all of those are actually sandworm. And so at Dragos, what we do is we group activity by how, right? How they're operating. I don't care if it's multiple teams out there working a single victim in a single incident, right? From me and the defender's perspective, we care about the how more than we care about the who. Now, I'm not going to say you want to throw away the who, but from a defensive perspective, it is the primary question that you want to ask. Who is secondary to that? And so we prioritize based on what ultimately is your defensive priority, the how. And so here, what we do is we group and we label things by rare earth minerals. In this case, it's dimalloy. And so they have a tool, right? I'm going to use the word they. That's okay. It's just a group, right? I'm just attributing it to a group, not to an actual person. They have a tool in that group called GUDOR. And so what we're going to do is we're going to track through an event here. So we're going to assume that one of our EDR things caught GUDOR, and so we're going to basically go through like, okay, well, what do we do now? Okay, so now that we found this GUDOR, we got a hash. Okay, so now we're going to pivot into, go ahead and next slide, Andy. We're going to pivot into ThreatConnect, and we're going to search, and we're going to find that Dragos has a report on this activity group called Dymalloy and this thing called GUDOR. And what does Dragos know about it? Well, we know that they likely use phishing, and that it's an exploit laden attachment, and then it drops this, the installer drops GUDOR, which implants the victim's machine, which then uses HTTP posts from the victim to several different command and control IPs. So with that, right, if our SOC gave us this hash, and we're like, hey, that's interesting. Now we pivoted in here and we're like, hey, this isn't good, right? We got other things going on here. Plus Dragos, is telling us that this is potentially associated with an industrial control threat. There might be more here than meets the eye. So maybe we should take a different remediation approach, right? Maybe we should be more strategic in our remediation rather than just wipe and replace what's going on. So now let's go, and we're going to pivot, and we're going to take one of the known IPs, and we're going to pivot further down into Intel in via ThreatConnect. And what we find is that, hey, this IP address, this exact same hash was being used by another intrusion that US CERT released a report on. And it is a callback string for a dropper. And that's interesting because Dragos report is from 2017, and this US CERT report is from 2018, which means that now I have new intel that I can use. And again, these are all based on the diamond, right? What I'm asking are questions is, I have a capability in front of me. It's this hash, right? It's the description of a file. And my question now is, well, what infrastructure is out there, right? Dragos just gave me a bunch of IPs, and hey, I got a whole bunch of new ones from US CERT, and these, seem to be really interesting. And hey, this one IP address has been active for at least a year. That's interesting, right? Not all adversaries leverage infrastructure forever, or for a very long time. So somebody using command and control for more than a year, that's kind of interesting. What that means to me now as an Intel analyst is, hey, maybe some of the older indicators are as valuable as the newer indicators, because maybe they're not very good at refreshing and renewing all of their stuff. So I should be able to possibly be able to use some of the older stuff, right? So that's important as a threat analyst, because we need to start knowing about when we drop, when things don't become as important to us, and where we don't want to waste our time. And so this is a good piece of intel now. And so now we've moved into a new piece of infrastructure. Now I'm going to search, right? Maybe I'll search my wireless logs, and I'll search my firewall logs. I'll search my proxy logs, my VPN, all that stuff, anywhere I get IP data, right? I'm going to go ask questions. I'm going to interrogate my data, and I'm going to say, where have I seen this? And if I have, where have I seen it? So now we know we have a box infected, and we can pivot out and check our network data to see what we got. So, right, so we found a network sample. We're going to go out, and now we're like, hey, the sample's got IPs. I can go pull that IP for new infrastructure. And I can say, hey, this stuff it's all of the stuff still seems to be active, which is good for me. And now I can match, these known TTPs to a group, and I can say, hey, these behaviors, these IPs and this, hash all belong to this Dymalloy group, and now I can read more about them. What kind of victims are they targeting, or do we fall within that or not within that? Things of that nature. And so you can start asking a lot more questions. Again, this just came down to a single hash that came out, and then some pivoting and some good questions we started asking about what do we need to know about this campaign. Okay, so next, Andy. So a lot of good things, right? Like I just said, we have reuse of a previously known tool using the same default string, using known infrastructure. We've pivoted and found a different report over a different time frame that described another incident. And is this the same victim? Are we within their victimology? Maybe they changed over time, right? Maybe we are a new victim and they, that didn't follow through. These are all very good questions, right? As to what's going on here. So how does this all help, right? Well, first of all, the diamond model just becomes a very simple taxonomy, and it's not one I ever claim to say it's a complete or effective taxonomy, but it becomes a very basic one, at least for mental models, where we have adversaries, capabilities, infrastructure, and victims. And those are the fundamental things that every intrusion event has. And so when you get down to it, you got to get down to basics. And this is really it, right? There's a bad guy targeting a victim using a capability over some infrastructure. And they can swap all of those pieces out, right? It's like a Rubik's Cube, right? We can move all of the colors and we can move all this together and maybe create a different picture than was created before. And the important thing is that, we can plug all of this together and we can ask questions of the intelligence, of the data, of our knowledge, and we can ask meta questions, right? Like I was just saying is, well, what do we know now? What should we know? What could we predict about an adversary in the future? And these are all questions as analysts, security analysts and intel analysts, we want to stretch for. The reusage of IPs and domains and TTPs are extremely common, right? Bad guys don't want to recreate stuff as much as you want to recreate stuff. They're just as lazy as you and I are. And so, effectively, if we can use our intel to identify the best, to identify a good date of cutoff date, right? What we call the intel cutoff date of when is the intel good for? That's not easy, right? As an intel producer myself, it's hard for me to tell you how long this is going to be good for, right? I just don't know. And I could guess maybe, depending on the data I have available, but maybe I can't. And so honestly, as a consumer of intel, that's going to be a really important question for you to ask. And so that's one of the things that you should get from a wide variety of data that's available to you in something like ThreatConnect. And then, fundamentally, then understanding how slight modifications of the attack chain, right? Well, what if they swap out a tool? Well, that's okay. If they're using the same IP addresses for command and control, they can go use another tool. One of the cool things I found in my career is that bad guys really only swap one of two things out at a time. It's at least not necessarily entirely on the commodity threat side, but generally you don't swap infrastructure and capability at the same time. And it changes too much and causes too much risk and damage to operations. And so that the value of that is as defenders, we can use that against them, and we do, and you should continue to do so. So with that, I think fundamentally the idea is that it gets you to a better place from a decision-making perspective, right? How do we remediate? What should we remediate? And what should I do now as a defender are fundamentally the questions you should be asking your organization and your intel, right? That you're getting from others, that you're producing yourself, as you are the best producer of intel in the world, out of your own data, and your own visibility is the best intel you can get ever. And so fundamentally, you should be getting to how am I improving the decision-making process in my security operations, right? Are we making ourselves more secure over time? And fundamentally, the diamond model helps you get there by asking, helping you ask important and intelligent questions of your data.
Very good. The only thing I'll add, Sergio, is something you hit on there with typically there's a high cost to the adversary of changing out all capabilities or all infrastructure at any given time, and that is really what enables the diamond model to be useful. Is that you can pivot across these even as they evolve, because very rarely, if ever, do you see an adversary that is capable of changing out everything all at once. And if they are, as far as an activity group goes, fundamentally, they've changed. They may attack the same victim over time, in which case you might reacquire them. But in reality, they have limits to their own resources that make that extremely difficult to actually pull off.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
So we do have several questions. I'll make sure that we hit conclusions. That this was just a primer. While I thoroughly enjoyed the dialogue that Sergio and I had, we really only hit various facets of the surface of the diamond here, and putting them to use is a lot. We'll take more investigation, and so encourage anyone who's really serious or very interested in it. Please check out thediamondmodel.org. You can get the full paper and various other resources to help you get started. If you actually want to buy something from us, please please contact, if you're interested in Dragos's Worldview Intelligence, please contact Intel at Dragos. If you're interested in the ThreatConnect platform, or both, please contact our team at sales@threatconnect.com. And with that, why don't I start going through some of these questions that we haven't hit yet.
Alan asked a good one. Do adversaries also include malicious insiders? Absolutely, Alan. The diamond model does not discriminate. In fact, an insider operates pretty much exactly like an outsider in many ways, and the diamond model doesn't discriminate between the two. So yes.
Yeah, I'd say that the only nuances there is that your infrastructure is likely to be mostly within your own assets. Right.
Exactly, and the capabilities may be different. Think also that a capability can be like a USB key. It could be a printer. In fact, if you're talking about like offline attacks, against air gap networks, then usually we do see sneaker netting and things like that happening. And so capabilities can be infrastructure and capabilities can be interesting non-network, non-digital assets.
Okay, let me read off the next one from Joseph. Do you see the diamond model needing to be adapted in the near future due to A, improving adversary OPSEC, and B, GDPR in the EU? It feels like soon the jump from capability to adversary will rely heavily on malware analysts and others who can identify code reuse and other recurring TTPs. I think this is a fair question. So I'll take a first shot, and then Sergio, add anything that I miss. I don't think that the diamond model itself needs to be adapted. I think that the ability to pivot from one feature or another is expected to change over time, whether that's because of new regulation that makes certain data sets no longer available, such as what we've got with WHOIS and GDPR, or improving adversary OPSEC, where they just make it harder because they're better. Although that is in of itself sometimes a false premise. Adversary OPSEC does not necessarily improve over time, at least in my observations. I don't know, Serge, do you have anything to add to that?
Yep, I completely agree. The data is going to change. The facts that bad guys are still going to do things are going to remain the same. How they do things are going to change. But I also agree that bad guys don't necessarily get smarter over time. Andy, I think it's because they're adding new people, just like we're adding new people, and so the new people continue to make mistakes and learn the hard way. So yeah, I'm not seeing necessarily a quote unquote better adversary over time. Certain adversaries are, but I think as a general trend, no.
Okay. Next one, are you using events and incidents to mean the same thing? It appears that the activity threads make up an incident. So events and incidents should be different in the diamond. Actually, a diamond is an event, although there may be some aspects of that event that are unknown in terms of the infrastructure, adversary, or capability. But the string of causally related events form an activity thread, which is conveniently characterized as an incident, but there's instances where perhaps it is not.
Yeah, and I think we answered this next one about MITRE and attack in it, and also the next one by Josiah.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
Let's see. I have an idea to create a new 4J web application to handle the diamond model. That's awesome. We'd love to.
I don't know anything like that.
Yeah. I've not seen anyone just open source, putting that out there. We, of course, we use the diamond model to inform our own data model within ThreatConnect, and I think there are some organizations that have done it inside of their own organization. I'm not aware of anything just out there.
And Annie asks a great question on reference guides on TTLs for IOCs, and that's great. There is not, as far as I understand or as I know, there's not been any real good fundamental research done on TTLs for IOCs. And so you're right. I think what you described there is exactly right. Using a mixture of the kill chain and attack and and a bunch of things to kind of figure out how to do it. So the answer is that's great. Yeah, I mean that's a huge amount of research work that could be done. I could see an entire graduate set of computer security papers coming out of something like that. And then you ask, is there future work being done on the diamond model? Yeah, there is, but it is going to be some work between us and MITRE probably on the attack and diamond and how they work together better. More to clarify the position for analysts and make it more like a handbook, kind of like, here's how these things work together, right? So that it's easier for everyone to take advantage of it. I've been asked before about a diamond 2.0, and honestly, I just don't think it's ready for that yet. I mean, I've got some ideas, but I think honestly, I hope other people take the idea and just go with it, right? And evolve it and see what we can make it better as.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is as I mentioned before, I'm excited to see that as newer work is done in complementary space, that oftentimes we can find use cases quite easily and naturally that tie in with the diamond or that complement it. And you can see that with kill chain, you can see that with attack, and others I'm sure will be the same.
Yeah. Josiah asks, if you were to expand the diamond model by one additional node, what would you suggest to add value? Well, I think that's a bit heretical because the diamond model is perfect as is, Josiah. But
if you made a fifth node, it would have to be the pentagram.
Well, it wouldn't look right anymore. I don't know. No, you ask a great question, which is, I think it gets back to Annie's question, right? Which is, well, the future work to be done on the diamond. Is it right? No, it is not. It is a starting point, and I hope it's a starting point for a lot of people, and I hope a lot of people end up making it better than it is. So I don't know of one off the top of my head. It works pretty well right now, but I have seen some flaws, some challenges with it. So.
Yeah. Okay. What keeps you up at night? What threats keep you up at night, Sergio?
Let's see. It would probably be poisoning drinking water. The ability, there's several ways of poisoning drinking water, and I would say that that's probably the biggest thing that's keeping me up at night and thinking of protecting water assets.
Yeah, that's scarier than what I was thinking of, so I'm gonna hold that. I think you trumped me on that one. So yeah, I mean there are threats to democracy, right? But those are a little bit less tangible than threats to life. That I think a lot of the space that Dragos spends its time defending is probably the scariest set of threats out there. Okay, well, we are just about at the top of the hour, and I think we've gone through all the immediate questions. I saw several questions in here that I think our team answered already about, will the slides be posted? Yes, they will, and we'll make the recording available as well.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your time. I really do appreciate it. Your time is really valuable, and it was awesome to have you here. Thank you so much.
Likewise, and thank you, Sergio, for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Andy. This has been fun. We should do it again.
Anytime. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.